Time now for MediaWatch, and Emma James has been looking at the reactions to the Chilcot report and the words, of course, of the former Prime Minister Tony Blair that have come back to haunt him.
Yes, absolutely. Although there are 2.6 million words in the Chilcot inquiry report, there are 6 that most people seem to be talking about right now, and they are "I will be with you forever." They come from a note on Iraq written by Tony Blair, and it was written just under a year before the invasion actually took place. It has now, of course, been declassified, as you can see from the stamp on that image there. In this note, as well as saying to President Bush that he will be with you whatever, he goes on to say that getting rid of Saddam is the right thing to do, but then outlines the danger of what he calls unintended consequences, many of which we now know did go on to happen, including civilian casualties. Now, the Daily Beast has been looking at these particular words and says, with these 6 words, the British Prime Minister sealed his fate, committed his country to a disastrous war, and ultimately wrote the phrase that will endure on his political headstone. The Guardian has this article written by journalist Sarah Helm, who says that she overheard a telephone conversation which happened in 2003, just before the invasion of Iraq by the Allied forces. And in it, she said the US president told the Prime Minister he was ready to kick ass. Blair laughed nervously and talked about his epitaph, perhaps foreseeing what has happened now. Bush then urged his junior partner to have cojones. So a lot of people have always criticised the UK for allowing themselves to be the poodle of the US, and this particular exchange would seem to back that argument up. Lots of different opinions are being expressed online about this. Remember that Blair said history will be my judge. Well, it's just happened, and the judgment is utterly damning. Gérard Araud, the French ambassador to the United States, says, may I remind everybody how France was abused and denigrated for opposing the war. France was right, he says. Kevin Maguire from the UK's Daily Mirror newspaper says Iraq was Blair's war, but David Cameron, the current UK Prime Minister, and Theresa May, the woman most likely to succeed him as Prime Minister in just a couple of months' time, both voted for this war to go ahead. Would they do so again on what they now know, he asks. Jeremy Corbyn, the leader of the opposition, to his credit, opposed it in 2003, he points out. Now, it could be that this moment will turn out to be Jeremy Corbyn's finest moment. The current Labour leader is basically hanging on to power by his fingertips at this moment in time. But as this Twitter user points out, whatever else he may be judged on in this regard, Corbyn has got it right, because he has issued a full apology from the Labour Party, an apology that she says is long overdue.
Well, of course, Tony Blair has spoken at length since that report was released this Wednesday, but his apology hasn't silenced the protesters.
No, absolutely not. Lots of people saying online that although he started off very well with his apology, he then seemed to almost backtrack as he was asked more questions by journalists. But there's always been a very vocal opposition to that war in Iraq. Around 2 million people protested back in 2003, and lots were on the streets today carrying placards like this one, Blair, Tony Blair, the media's favourite war criminal, and this one too, Bomber Blair, jail this war criminal now. There are politicians too calling for him to be held criminally responsible for what he did in Iraq, but it is probably the emotional words of a bereaved relative that are likely to echo the loudest on this one. Sarah O'Connor, whose brother was killed in action in Iraq, said there is one terrorist in this world that the world needs to be aware of, and his name is Tony Blair, the world's worst terrorist, she says. Now, The Telegraph has been looking at what would have happened if we had never invaded Iraq, and it is one of those things that we will never know, because you can't carry out a controlled experiment on it. But this writer says that policymakers never had a choice between peace and war in Iraq. It was a country often referred to as a concentration camp above ground and a mass grave beneath. She basically says that it probably would have gone on to be caught up in the Arab Spring, and that what we would see in Iraq would be what we have seen in Syria, with the civilians paying the price really for dictators' desire to hang on to power. Just one last word on this. George W. Bush has said very little today because he's been busy celebrating his 70th birthday. No coincidence, I'm assuming, that he's chosen to spend it with wounded soldiers at his ranch. He has, though, issued a statement saying that the world is better off without Saddam Hussein in power.
Okay, Emma James with MediaWatch. Thank you very much.